Have you seen Mike this week on television? What an amazing story. Here's this guy grabbing lobster. I don't know if you've ever dove for lobster, but man, you're down there in the water and you hunt them at night normally, and they're always right on the edge of the rocks. You got to reach back in there and grab them. I mean, reaching in holes in the ocean. Anyways, it's a little spooky kind of a thing. Anyways, and there's also these other things out there called sharks and all of that. Okay, if you haven't heard about Mike, this week he's become famous because he was swallowed by a humpback whale. Now, when I saw that, Jerry and I were out at a meeting. It popped up on my phone. I said, oh, there is an awesome illustration. There's an awesome illustration. In fact, I immediately texted it to my two sons who are pastors and said, boys, put that in the file. You're going to need this. Because of the last 33 years, when I'm talking to my friends who are atheists or skeptics of the Bible or agnostics, whatever, one of the things that they always bring up is you can't trust the Bible. Mark, you seem like a nice guy. You seem like a fairly intelligent person. You seem like a reasonable person. Why in the world would you believe the Bible? You know it's not true. I mean, Noah and the ark, come on. How can you get animals on that boat? I mean, the boat wouldn't be big enough for all the animals. And I always ask, how big was the boat? They never know. How many animals? They never know. Well, if you don't know how big the ark is and you don't know how many animals, then how can you be so certain that you don't know they would fit? And now, actually, we know that the ark was probably half empty. Why? Because God made provision for others and sent a preacher for 120 years. His name was Noah. They were uninterested. But after they attack Noah, it always seems that they jump to Jonah. And you can't believe the Bible. You can't be swallowed by a fish. Can I just tell you? Jesus settled that for me. Remember when he was asked, give us a sign, Lord, and we'll believe in you? And he says, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. No sign shall be given to you except for that of Jonah, who spent 3 days in the belly of a great fish. Even so, the Son of Man will spend 3 days in the belly of the earth. How many of you know Jesus spent 3 days in the grave and he rose again? Listen, that's a much bigger miracle than Jonah and that fish. But you remember, Jonah receives a commission from God to go and do something he didn't want to do. Friends, God's going to ask you to do some things you don't want to do necessarily. And in that case, it was to go and to speak to a bunch of people that he hated. He hated those Syrians. He hated those Ninevites. He hated those folks in that city. They had butchered his people. There had been wars in the past. He wanted to see them in hell. That's where he wanted to see them. And you remember, he runs from God, goes to Joppa, jumps on a boat. Can I just tell you, it doesn't matter how far you run, how much technology you have, you can't run from God. And he didn't know that, or at least he didn't believe it at the moment. And he ends up in that boat. Great storm comes along. You say, well, nothing can change my mind. Okay, friends, you run from God. Let's see how big a storm God can create to change your mind. And he ends up being thrown in the water. Remember, the Bible doesn't say it was a whale. It just says it was a fish, whatever that means. Anyways, he swallows him, and he's there. And what would you do if you were swallowed by a fish? Mike's story is amazing. He said, all I could feel was the skin and muscle around me, and it was horrible, and I thought I was dead. And anyways, he's just going on telling this. You got to go watch it this afternoon. And then, of course, you remember he's thrown up on the beach. Jonah's thrown up on the beach. And he goes and preaches in Nineveh. And the greatest revival in biblical proportions anyways, a few days of preaching in Nineveh, 100,000 people end up believing in God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, what's all that to tell you? Simply this. This, I believe, in the providence of God, has allowed this to happen in the last days as a pointer. You've mocked me for 2,500 years since I've told the story of Jonah. Well, go meet Mike. All right? And I want you to walk away with this. You can trust the Bible. There are very few things you can trust in the world. And the one thing you can trust for sure is the Bible. So trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He'll direct your paths. You can trust in the Bible.